through today and then get us set up on the next set so that you'll have your homework. And great patterning from the designer. She has you slip the third to last stitch on the end, and that gives you, this end gives you that elongated stitch that you then increase with. So that makes a really nice design feature on the end that's doing the increases. There is that row that looks like the wrong row, as Anne thought, but you do have that row of purl, and that makes your box between purl stitches on either side. So you end up with a box shape in between. And then the cabling on this one is very different. It's done, you're crossing over what is a stocking stitch inside the cable, and you're actually cabling 3 times. So I'll talk you through that. But by itself, that really doesn't look, you don't really get to see it. So this is a project that will need blocking, because when I block it and I pull down and I'll stretch it this way, that's when you get to see the detailing there inside these cable circle or ovals. So that will really showcase this much better when it's blocked versus when it's just sitting like this. So blocking will be important for this project. So to get started, it's casting on 6 stitches. And just for those who've just joined us, I did mention, I'm going to suggest that you cast on using the cable cast on. We had talked about cable cast on versus doing a long tail cast on in prior classes. And then I'm not sure if you can switch camera to the actual working yarn to be able to show. But if you can look here, I just did a sample. So this is using, the first portion here is using long tail, and this is cable. And the reason that I'm suggesting that we use this one, the cable cast on, is because when you do long tail, you would normally then, when you turn it over, you end up with the edge that you're seeing is much neater on this, which is called the cable cast on. So I'll show you how to do the cable cast on for those that haven't tried that one before, but that versus this is the look that you got with the long tail cast on. It's only 6 stitches. It's not a huge deal to do it that way, but just to make a nice edge to start. So to start, you're going to make the slip knot that you start most projects with. And a cable cast on is where you put the needle, the first stitch is always a bit strange, but I'm holding the yarn and the tail, and I'm putting the needle right behind both of those. So it's actually behind the stitch. That first one, as I say, can be a little bit difficult, but then I'm going to wrap the yarn around it as if I'm going to knit it. And I'm going to pull it towards me, and then that stitch that I've just created, I'm going to do a twist of the left needle and put it on. And then that has got me 2 stitches on my left needle. And now it'll be a bit easier. I still hold the tail just to keep it out of the way, but I put the needle between the 2 stitches. So you can see there's both legs of the stitch here. So it's between both legs of stitch 1 and stitch 2. I wrap the yarn as if I'm going to knit it, bring it out and put it back a twist onto that left needle. So that's 3 stitches on the needle, so I just need 3 more. So I put the needle between the 2, pull it, and then twist that left needle to pick up that stitch. Around, pull, and put it on. And again, one more time for that last stitch, and just showing you that the stitch is going between the stitch you just created and the stitch before it. You're catching both legs with the needle. You wrap the yarn around, bring it through, and put it on the left needle. So there's my 6 stitches. And by all means, if you ladies need me to slow down, back up, do again, please just shout out. Again, this isn't an imperative start. If you prefer to do long tail, go right ahead. But I just like the look that gives you for the start of the shawl. I feel it gives it some stability for the start of the shawl there.
Brina, could you show that again, please? Sorry.
Yeah, most certainly. So cable cast on is where you have your 2 stitches. Do you have any on the needle at all, or are you starting from the first loop?
I do. I have 2.
Okay, so perfect. So you're going to take your right needle tip and put it between the two stitches that you have. It goes directly between the two, which means when you turn it, you see you've got both legs on the right there. And then from that position, you would just go ahead and wrap the yarn around as if you're going to knit the stitch. You bring it through and then twist it onto that left needle, and that creates the stitch. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
So you're not knitting into a stitch, you're knitting between the stitches?
Exactly, exactly. If you knit into the stitch, if I was just to do the knitted cast on, which is just putting the yarn through the first leg of that stitch and doing the same motion, it doesn't create as stable a base. By putting it between both of those stitches, you end up with this nice firm base across the bottom.
And you use double yarn because you have your tail in too?
Oh, sorry. Thank you for pointing that out. I'm using double yarn because I'm using lace weight instead of fingering. And so it's yarn that I had and I really wanted to make into this shawl. So thank you for, I should have pointed that out from the start. The only reason you're seeing two strands for me is because I'm treating it as if it's fingering weight by doing that, because it's a very fine yarn that I have. So it is just the main strand. I keep the tail off to one side. And then I've cast on my 6 stitches. I just happen to say have the double just because it's the lace weight. So we good to go on with the next step?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, everybody else good? Yeah, perfect. Okay, just so you know, I've got a view where I only see a couple of people at a time. So if you do have, say, please be verbal with it, because I might not see you if you're putting your hand up, or if you're shaking your head, I might not see it. So I'm going to read off I'm going to be going from the chart. And I just mentioned earlier, I'm normally not a chart reader. I love the written instructions. And so but it's good because this pattern, the chart is so well laid out that I found it easier visually to follow from the chart. So as I'm following the chart, I'm going to be reading out the instructions, which will be matching the written instructions. So the pattern is terrific that it has both. So whatever your comfort level is, go ahead and do the chart or do the written instructions. They're identical. It's just whichever your comfort level is. If you've not done chart before and you'd like to give it a try, because I'm reading out the instructions as we go along, you might find it's a good way to learn chart knitting. Because there are occasions where some patterns will only have charts and you won't be able to get the written instructions for them. So in this case, when you're doing a chart and you're reading from a chart, you always start from the right side and then you go to the left side. So the chart as laid out here, you can see that she has numbers 1 and 3 and 5 and 7. So that's your first row, 3rd, 5th. And then when you come back the other way, you have row 2. So you're literally knitting from the right side. You're going to go across, and then for row number 2, that's the wrong side, coming back again. So each of these squares, there's a symbol at the top of the page. And when you see a white square, you're knitting on the right side and purling on the wrong side. This is the little dot here is the opposite. So on the right side, you're purling, and on the wrong side, you're knitting. And this, she's got a fancy increase here, which is where you're going to knit into the front, the back, and then the front again. So you're making 3 stitches where there was 1 stitch before. So it's a good little diagram piece to be able to see the 3, oops, there we go, the 3 where there was 1 before. So we're just going to deal with these first few rows, and then when we get to this cross, I'll come back to the visual of it for you. But for this pattern then, you're going to, for your first row, you're going to knit the first 2 stitches because there's the white box. So the white box on the right side is knit 2. And then you immediately go into that increase. And that increase is you're going to knit into the front of the stitch, keep the stitch on the left needle, take the needle around and knit into the back of that same stitch, pass the yarn around and pull through. I'll repeat this, I'll do this one again. And then keeping that left needle on, you're going to take your right needle back in again to the front, wrap the yarn and pull through. So I've actually got now on my needle, I have 3 stitches, 1, 2, 3, where there was just the one before. So I'm going to undo that one and redo it just so that you can see it again. I think most of you have probably tackled the knit front and back for the increases that we did if you did the spring thing shawl with us. This one just takes it one extra step. So you're going to knit into the front of the stitch. You're going to take the right needle and take it to the back of the same stitch, pass the yarn around and bring it through. And still keeping that left stitch on the left needle, you're going to take the right needle back in and do one more time with that stitch. And now you've got 3 where you had 2 before. So once you've done that increase, you're going to knit 2. There's 2 white squares. And the last square is a purl one. So you bring the wool to the front and do that purl stitch. So that's the first row completed. Doesn't look like much, but we'll turn around and go to row 2. So row 2, we're reading from left to right. And the black dot, when you're doing it that way, is a knit stitch. So it's in sort of reverse of the first stitch. So you're going to knit that first stitch. And then you're going to purl 4 stitches. Oops, there we go, 4 stitches. And then you've got a very large V. So that very large V is you're going to slip the next stitch as if to purl, keeping the yarn in the front with you. And it's just a slip stitch. And then the next 2 are black dots, which means you're knitting them on this row. So you take the yarn to the back of your work into the knit position and knit the 2 stitches. So that's your second row done. And turn your work. I'm going to pause for a minute and just check in and see if anybody's, are you all with me at this point, or do you have any questions? Silence is golden. I know, Cindy, you sometimes have problems with audio based on where you're based. So if you want to type and use the question chat box, please feel free. Same with anybody. If you want to use the chat box, please do. So on to row 3, and row 3 is reading from the right of the chart to the left of the chart. So the 2 white boxes are knit 2. And then we've got that increase. And you'll notice that that increase is happening on that elongated stitch. So that stitch that you slipped before is the one that you're going to now do that knit front. Take the needle round and knit back. And then keeping that same, give it a nice pull on the yarn and bring it back into the front of the same stitch. So I've created the 3 stitches there, and you'll see it'll start to form where you've got a really nice elongated stitch happening. And now I'm going to knit to the end of the row and purl that last stitch. In the last class, we had talked about whether you should slip the first stitch or the last stitch on a shawl. And in this case, the designer has given us very clear instruction as to how they want this to be. So that's a purl stitch at the end. And you're going to turn the work and now come back on. Row 4 has got more of those elongated slip stitches. So we're going to knit the first stitch. We're going to bring, this is very important now, to bring the yarn to the front and slip that next stitch as if to purl. And then you have to take the yarn back to the back in the knit position to knit the next 2 stitches. You'll see there's the 2 black dots. Then you've got another V. So you're bringing the wool to the front again. You're going to slip. That's one of your increased stitches that you got. Take the yarn back into the knit position at the back. You're going to knit 2 more stitches, bringing it to the front to give another V, slip stitch, and then take the yarn to the back for your last 2 knit stitches. So that's 4 rows completed. Again, I'm going to pause and just see anybody got any questions. Everybody with me so far?
No.
No? Where are you at?
I got slowed down, so I'm not even sure where you're at. So I just finished row 3, I think.
Okay, so we've just finished 4, so we're just 1 row behind.
Okay.
Just a question. If you don't, I noticed you pulled back on your wool a little bit to go into the front the second time. If you don't do that, does it pucker?
I do it because for me it gives me the flexibility then to get the needle in and to go around. I think it would make a tighter stitch, and the aim of doing it is to keep a very loose stitch going, so that that's part of the patterning, because you're going to be going into that stitch, that slip stitch that you've done. You're going to be going into it 3 times when you turn around, or slipping it the next. So I think it's, if you can keep it looser, it'll make a nice detail for it.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe mine is a little tight, which is why it's puckering.
Yeah, that would make a difference if you can loosen it up a little bit. Blocking will help, but not if it's so tight that it's not allowing the stitch to be stretched.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So I know it's not looking like very much right now with our 4 rows done, but you will start to see you've got the purl bumps are now showing on the right side, which is the start of your first box. You've got the slipped stitch that you've been doing at that on the right side as well, your 3rd stitch in. That's going to be consistent now all the way up the shawl. And then you've also got a slipped stitch and the purl on the left side. So we're starting to build the box. But now we get into the fun cable. So again, I'm just going to add, is everybody managed to complete 4?
No, I'm still struggling with 4.
Okay, that's fine. We'll pause. Because 4 is very much, I know you can watch the video afterwards, but if you're able to do it along, it's a very unusual cable that we're going to be doing. And what it does, she has you actually forming for 2 cables, but it's great continuation of this elongated stitch, and it really does pull this stitch to make it a really nice twist.
So beginning of 4, you knit 1.
Yes.
And then you're sliding 1 with the yarn in front.
Yes. Slip 1.
And you're knitting 2. You're not slipping it over? I thought we slipped it over.
You are slipping it, yeah. So you'll knit 1 stitch.
Okay.
Bring the yarn to the front and slip 1 as if to purl.
Right.
And then take the yarn to the back again and knit 2.
Okay.
So the row is going to be knit 1, slip 1, knit 2, slip 1, knit 2, slip 1, knit 2. But just making sure that when you're doing that slip stitch as if to purl, because you've got the wrong side showing, you want to make sure that the yarn goes back and forth so you don't end up making a stitch. So if you want to just do a stitch count at this point, you should have 10 stitches.
Yeah.
On the needle.
At the end of 3, you have 10, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And at the end of 4, because you're not increasing or changing your stitch count on row 4.
Okay, I'm messing up here. I gotta start over.
So do you want us, if we continue ahead, and then that way it'll sort of come back around again?
Yep.
So row 5 is the fun one. We're going to knit those first 2 stitches. This is going to be the base of the shawl all the way along, where you're going to knit your first 2 stitches. And then there's that nice elongated stitch that you slipped on the row below. So you're going to go in to knit the front leg, carry the needle to the back, knit the back. And then, like I say, I just give it that little pull to be able to twist the needle around and be able to do the 3rd part of that stitch. So I've got my 3 stitches there out of 1. And then I'm going to knit 2 stitches, which is the white boxes again. And now we get to the fun cable. So they call it 121 LC. So LC means left cable. So you're going to be basically taking this stitch and taking it over to the left side. But as I mentioned, it's a very unusual one. So I'm going to do the first time, I'll do it with 2 cable needles, and then I'll show you another way of doing it if you'd like after that. So what the LC, 121 LC is, you're going to take that first stitch and slide it onto your cable needle and leave it in front. And by leaving it in front, it's going to take it over to the left. you're going to take the next 2 stitches and put them on a cable needle and leave them in the back. So you have 3 stitches now that are on cable needles. And then you're going to knit the next stitch off the left needle, neither of the cable needles. You're going to knit the left stitch, and then you're going to come back and knit the 2 that were on behind. So you can knit the 2 stitches that were on the back cable needle, and then you take the one that you're holding in the front, and again, everybody does it. I like to slip it back onto the left needle and then knit that 1 stitch. And then you're going to purl the very last stitch. So I'll run through that again because it is an unusual cable. But I'm going to run through it again just on this one because it's be easier to show on this project here. Give me 1 second. Okay. So from this, you're going to take the very first stitch onto a cable needle and you're going to hold it in the front of your work. You have a second cable needle that you're going to take the next 2 stitches, slide them off the left needle onto your cable needle. Now I've got 1 in front and I have 2 behind me. I'm going to knit 1 stitch off the left needle. And then the other way of doing this is so then knitting the 2 off the behind cable needle. And then taking the 1 off the front cable needle next. So again, I find it easier, especially when it's a single, I find it easier to take that single stitch and slip it back onto your left needle to be able to knit it. And you'll see it stretches it across and it makes that nice twist to it. That makes the nice twist that it's an elongated stitch. So I'm going to go to gallery view and see everybody's faces and see if people are enjoying this or are confused. How does that work for everybody?
My cable needle falls out because my stitches are so loose.
Oh, okay.
And I've only got 1 of them. Are you going to talk about doing it without cable needles?
I will. So let me show you then. Yes, let me show you if you've just got the 1 cable needle.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that I was doing this yesterday, because I just had the 1 set up. So if you just have the 1, the most important one is your front one to put onto the needle because that's going over 3 stitches.
Okay.
So I would slip the first one using that cable needle.
Mm-hmm.
And then hold that down in front. And then what you might find easier, Heather, is when you say it slips, I engage my left thumb and my middle finger on my left hand to hold that cable needle.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? So now the next 2 stitches would have been put at the back of your work. So what I do is put the needle into the front of the 3rd stitch. That's the one that you would be knitting.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to slide off all 3 stitches, 1, 2, and 3, while just keeping the needle close to the top. Slide off all 3, and then pick up the back 2. And then slide the 1 back on that was held. Is this a bad color? Do you want me to change yarn color? Let me try with my orange.
I can't look up. I'm afraid I'm going to drop something.
Let me try with my orange yarn. Hang on a second.
Okay, so now I have it on those 3 on the right-hand needle.
And so you'll just need, hang on a second. Let me try with the, I have orange here and I feel like the green is reflecting very, very brightly. So I can do it. 1 second here. I have all kinds of demo pieces going here. So let me try with this. Okay. Is that a better color? It's easier stitch to see, I think. Okay. So what you're going to do, take half and half. Okay. So Just trying to get the camera there. So we're going to take that first stitch and put it onto the cable needle.
Mhm.
And then slip it off the left needle and hold it in the front.
Got it.
And then the right knitting needle, I'm going to put into the third stitch along, which means it's as if I've taken those 2 back stitches and put them on a cable needle in behind. But then you hold them and you slip off all 3 stitches off the left needle and then put it back in to just the 2 that were in
Oh, I
behind.
did the 3. Okay.
You've got because your third stitch is the one that you've got on your right needle.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And then that third stitch comes back on to the left needle. And then you knit those 3 off. I'll do it again to show you. You knit those 3 off, and then you take the one that was on your cable needle and knit that one off the cable needle or popping it onto your left needle. Everybody's being super quiet and focused. If you only have, the other thing is too with cable needles, you can use double pointed. If you've only got 1 cable needle and you want to keep the comfort of the cable needle, you can use double pointed needles. It has been done. Oh, Heather's got to go. Oh, Heather B, different Heather. Okay, so I'm going to do it again with this, with the orange, because I feel like, as I say, that's easier to see. So I'm going to take the first stitch. We're going to be working it over 4 stitches. And those of you that are reading the chart, you'll see that that left cross happens over 4 stitches. So you're going to be working on the 4 stitches. The first one you're going to take off and hold in front with the cable needle. If you have a second cable needle, you're going to take the next 2 and hold them in the back. If you don't have another cable needle, you're going to take your right knitting needle, put it into that 3rd stitch. I'm just trying to see if you can get my finger out the way there. So that's the 3rd stitch along. And then I'm going to slip all 3 stitches off, knowing that my 3rd stitch is secured by my right needle. I'm just going to slip all the stitches off and then put the left needle just back in the 2. And then I'm going to twist it and put that one that the right needle's holding onto the left needle, so that I can knit across the 3 stitches together, because that's formed that part of the cable. And then I'm going to take the one that was sitting in front and put it back onto the left side and knit that one off as well. So that's given the twist. With it being so close to the start of your work, it's going to be really hard to see the cable and how they're forming. It'll be when you get up to the next section. When we get up to row 13 is when you'll really see it. So how are we doing? Barb, I know you've done cables before because you showed us your sweater. Are you good with this one?
You know,
Like the audio's turned off, unfortunately.
okay.
There we go.
Okay. I thought it was like riding a bike. You know, once you, but it's not. It's just sort of trying to get back into the groove of everything. And I'm just following, and then I'm going to look at the recording and then start it from there.
Okay. So Judith, you're nodding your head too. Do you want me to, shall I continue going then, and because we will get to the other cable.
Yeah,
at the
I'll
end of the
catch up
slide.
on
That's okay. All right. So row 6, you're coming back from doing that cable row, and the row 6 is your wrong side row. So a black dot on the wrong side means knit 1, and then you're going to purl 1, and then knit 2, So what you're going to be doing with those, you're going to be creating a garter column that goes and runs through your cables to create that box. And then to finish row 6, you're going to purl across to the last 3 stitches. And you're going to slip that the third stitch as if to purl, don't actually purl it. Bring the yarn to the front and knit 2 stitches. So that's taken us to the end of row 6. So continuing on the pattern, because I know we'll get to that cable again on row 13, so I'll just keep reading it out, but rows 6, 8, 10 are the same as our rows 7 and 9 and 11. They're a repeat. So if we're going to head on to row 7 right now, we're going to knit 2 stitches. And then the stitch that I had slipped on the row below, I'm going to do my knit front, knit back, give it a little pull to be able to get the needle in around and knit the third one. And then we're going to love row 7 because you're going to knit all the way to the last stitch and give it and do a purl. Bring the yarn to the front to do that 1 purl stitch. And if you don't carry the yarn to the front, you'll end up doing making a stitch with the yarn over. So just always remember that. And now for row 8, I'm going to do knit 1 because it's a black dot on the wrong side. And then I'm going to purl 1, 2 more black dots, so 2 knit stitches. And then this is purl to those last 3 stitches again. So the way I can look at this pattern is there's only in the end, you're looking at every sort of, once it gets growing, every 10th row that you're doing something funky. The rest of the time, it's not so difficult to do the knits and the purls. I'm 3 stitches from the end, so I'm just going to slip it, bring the yarn to the front, and then do the last 2 knit stitches. That takes us to row 9. Row 9. You start with a long cord and not much knitting. The cord can get in the way sometimes. So row 9 is going to be knitting 2 stitches. I've got that slipped stitch from the row below, so I'm going to knit into the front, into the back, give it a pull to bring the needle back around and knit back into the front. And knit all the way to that last stitch, and then I'm going to purl. Purl the last stitch and turn around for row 10. So for those of you following the chart, you'll see that the dots are basically forming a garter stitch that the cables will then do the twist around. So row 10 is going to be a knit 1. And then I'm going to purl 1. So knit 2 to make that garter column. And then purl to the last 3 stitches. And you'll see when you get to the last 5 stitches, you'll have those increases that you did. And it's just the first stitch of those that you're slipping purl-wise. Don't actually purl it, just slip it and then move the yarn to the back of the work and knit those last 2 stitches. That's taking us now to row 11. We've got some fun coming up on row 12, but row 11 will stay the same. And I'm just going to open this just to show you the way you've got, so basically this is stocking stitch happening here. You'll have that nice elongated stitch carrying up the side. Whoops, there you go, up the side. And that first twist that we did, within that twist is a garter stitch, little 2-stitch that we're doing, knitting every row. Yours looks just the same, right, everybody? All right, I'm going to continue with row 11 here because 12 is nice and fun. So 2 white boxes on row 11 makes a knit 2. The next one is knitting your knit front, knitting into the back of that same stitch, and bringing the needle round and knitting into the front of it. So I've increased, and now I'm going to knit to the end of this row. And Barb, you mentioned that you thought it would be like riding a bike and easy to remember. Is it just the cable that's throwing you off, or is it the knitting itself?
It's just a,
Oh, you went back on mute, sorry.
it's the tension, just trying to follow, listen, and look at it at the same time, and look at my hands. So it's, but I'm getting there. I look at the next recording and then start all over. But in the meantime, I'm looking at yours and just fiddling around,
Okay.
getting used to the needles again.
So what will be good with the recording is that you'll be able to knit along and then hit pause and make it, you can shut me up. You can shut me up and catch up. That'll be much easier.
Those holes that you were showing, what creates that? Is that the increase into the front and back and the front?
It is, yes. So when you're saying holes, is it this side here where it's the elongated stitch?
No, well, no, on the other side, like yeah. You see there's those bigger, I'm pointing at the screen, that's not helping. So flip it back over again. So this is the right side, correct?
That's right. Yep.
Okay, so to the left of the big stitch is like, there's like a series of holes. I didn't have that because probably my was too tight, and that's hence the pucker. So I tore it out.
Okay, exactly, and that's exactly it. I think that, and when you're saying holes, when you look at the picture, the shawl doesn't have holes. When this expands, the yarn will work into those. It won't be like yarn over holes. It'll be just because of the knit purl knit into the one stitch. It just has created the space where it's opened up.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. So now we're on to fun row 12. So row 12 is the one when we first came on and Anne wasn't sure if she'd perhaps done a row wrong. Row 12 is where you're actually going to knit across the wrong side row, and that on the right side will help form a box that you're going to be creating. You're making these cubes. So for row 12, you're going to knit the first stitch, bring the yarn to the front to slip a stitch, which on the chart is that V. Take the yarn to the back and knit 2. And then you're going to bring the yarn back to the front to slip a V. And now there's going to be 4 knit stitches between. And then after you've done the 4 knit stitches, you'll bring the yarn back towards you. You'll slip that stitch as if to purl. Take the yarn to the back of the work and knit 2 more. Bring the yarn to the front to slip as if to purl. Take it to the back to knit 2 more. And then one more time, bring it to the front to slip as if to purl. And take it to the back to knit the last 2 stitches. So that's given you a garter base that you're going to end up with this purl ridge across by your needles. That's going to be the start of forming a cube. And where you've slipped the stitches, those are going to be either side to give you a bit of wiggle room to do your next cable. It's going to give you a nice elongated stitch there for the cable. So we're ready for row 13. And those following along on the chart will see that row 13 has got 2 of those 1, 2, 1 left cross cables in them. So I will make a start and I'll do one each of each style. I'll do one with 2 cable needles and I'll do one with just 1 cable needle. And that way it'll, hopefully the repetition will help for the next time you get to watch it. So to start the row, we have 2 knit stitches, which are 2 white boxes. And then we're going to do our increase into that elongated stitch, knitting into the front, knitting into the back, bringing the needle round and knitting into the front again, all of the same stitch. And then we're going to knit 2 stitches. And we're ready for that first cable. So, oh, and there goes one of my cable needles. 1 second. That's why I like doing them usually without cable needles, but when you are doing 2 cables within the one, it is handy to, you definitely need it. I did do it last night without, but I was holding the stitch. So I'm going to do this one with 1 cable needle for those that just have the one. So I'm going to slip the first stitch and hold it in the front. And I'm actually going to hold it down with my left thumb. I'm going to take my right working needle. I'm going to put it into that elongated stitch. That's the 3rd one along. So I'm going to see, you can see it there, so that the right needle's in that elongated stitch. I'm then going to slide all 3 stitches off the left needle. The one that's on the right needle is already trapped, so it's just the 2 in behind. It's as if you're doing a back cable for those. So I'm slipping all 3 stitches off and then putting the needle back into the 2 stitches. So now I've got 2 stitches on that back needle, on the left needle, and then the 1 stitch still on the right needle. That 1 stitch gets twisted around and put back on the left needle. So that's generally how you cable without a cable needle. So I can knit off the 3 stitches that were there now, from the left to the right, take my 1 stitch that's been waiting at the front, put it back onto my left needle, and then knit that stitch. And so that's given me the cable there. And now I'm going to knit 4 stitches. And there's a few hints as you're doing this pattern. What you'll notice is that your cables are going to run between those slipped V's, the slipped stitches from the row behind. That's what you're going to cable in between each of those. So you'll know at any given time if you're in the right position or not, because you're always wanting to cable above this column that you've made of garter stitch, the 2-stitch garter stitch with a slip stitch either side. So now I'll do it with the 2 cable needles. So if you've got the 2, you slip off the first stitch as you did before and hold it at the front. You take your 2nd cable needle and take the next 2 stitches and hold them in behind. And then you knit 1 stitch off the left needle onto the right needle. Sorry, keep moving, there you go. And then the next is to take the back cable needle. And I find it easier, especially with it being lighter weight, is to slip them back onto the left needle and knit those 2 stitches. And then take the front cable needle, slip it onto the left. And I'm going to knit that 1 stitch. And then the end stitch on every time you're doing this row is always going to be a purl stitch. So that is row 13 tackled.
Trina, when you're taking the stitch, like the first stitch onto the cable needle, are
Mhm.
you doing it knitways or are you slipping it?
I'm slipping it as if to purl.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. It keeps it without a twist, and it means that you get to see the twist of it pulls the stitch across when you're without a twist in it. So now I get to put the cable needles down because we're not going to cable needle again use those till row 21. We're on row 14. So row 14 is going to be a knit stitch. Again, reading the chart, it's a black dot on the wrong side, so that makes it a knit stitch. I'm going to purl 1 stitch and then knit 2. So each time those knit 2 are going to be the columns that run up through your whole shawl. Each time you'll be adding them. Bring the yarn back to purl position, and I'm going to purl across 6 stitches. Then I'm going to knit, take the wool to the back of the work to the knit position and knit 2. Bring it back to the front and then purl 5. And then you've got last 3 stitches, which is always going to be the case on your wrong side row. You'll always have the last 3 stitches where you slip as if to purl, bring the yarn to the back of the work and knit 2. So there are consistencies. While the pattern and you're looking at it thinking there's a lot of different stitches, there's very much some easy rows. We call them victory laps, where you don't have to think as much as you do on the cable row. And that's what kind of keeps you going on these projects, because you always think, oh, you just get to the next cable twist. And then you do that and think, oh, I'll just start on the next box. And then before you know it, you're at the next cable twist. That's in my world anyway. So row 15 is going to be knit 2. And we're going to do that increase where we're knitting into the front, the back, and the front of the stitch. And again, victory lap, you get to knit all the way to the end of row 15 and purl the last stitch. Bringing the wool to the front, purl that last stitch. So that's row 15. And row 16 is going to continue to build with a purl row back and just knitting the 2 stitches of that garter stitch column that you're making. So on row 16, I'm going to knit 1 with a black dot. It's the wrong side row. I'm going to purl 1 stitch. Take the wool to the back and knit 2. Bring it to the front and purl 6. Take it to the front and knit 2. And at this point, as I say, if you're not, some people with it's easier to see on the reverse side, but here you can see the difference of when you're doing the garter stitch versus the stocking stitch. You can see that the stitches are different for the garter of this. But always make sure that you're doing those knit 2 stitches on the same row. Now I'm going to purl all the way across to the last 3 stitches. And that third from the last, I'm going to slip as if to purl, but don't actually purl it. Bring the yarn to the back and knit 2. Now I'm going to go on, continue on with 17, 18, but just from a timing perspective, we're getting close to 6 o'clock. So is there anybody, I can go through the cables again, but basically just to explain the pattern, the chart 1 is the set of rows. So you're going to create the initial triangle. And once you finish that, you're going to go on to chart 2, and chart 2 is the same concept. If Iona, if you wouldn't mind making, I'm just going to go to the main screen if that's okay. I think it'd be easier for me to hold up. So chart 2 is actually, all this portion is the same as what you've been doing on chart 1. So where I've been talking about your garter stitch column, there's your garter stitch column of 2 stitches. You'll always be knitting those 2 stitches, whether you're on the right side or the wrong side. You'll have been doing this garter row that shows up just ahead of your cables. And the difference is on the 8th row, you're going to cast off 8 stitches. And that gives you a step shape to the shawl. So you'll cast off 8 and then you'll continue across. And then that's the way that the pattern is showing, because you'll have your increases. Between here is the repeat. This is the repeat that you'll be working as you're doing it. So the one trick with casting off the 8 stitches is that when you cast off the 8th one, you've already got that knit stitch. That is the 8th stitch that you cast off, leaves you with a stitch on your needle, and that's the stitch on the needle. So I'm not sure as far as for the timing of this. The original thought was that we would do, today we do row 1 to 22. And then the next group, if you want to keep going, by all means, please do. If not, if you want to just practice that part again, when we do the class next week, we can do rows 1 to 23 and then continue those as your homework. And then we'll get back on week 3 and take a look at doing the color work in between. So if I can check in with Iona and see if we need to add a 4th, we certainly can. But the original plan thinking is to get you started. You can practice that portion. Then next week we can continue, but by all means, feel free to continue if you want to go ahead and work ahead. But if you have any questions about the step, then you can ask where you do the cast off.
Sorry,
You're all quiet.
you said that you cast off the 8 stitches, and the 8th stitch is actually what?
You cast off the 8, and you know when you finish, once you finish casting off, you know you always end up with 1 stitch on the right needle when you cast off.
Yeah.
So that as you cast off your 8th stitch, you'll have a stitch left on the right needle. That is the first stitch of your chart. You've already completed it in order to cast off the 8th stitch.
But isn't that that's a knit stitch?
It's a knit stitch, yeah.
Okay, so it is the first black dot.
That's right.
So then the next one you would just purl.
Exactly, and then you'll have your 2 knit stitches, and by then you'll have seen the column grow, and it'll make sense when you get to that point that there'll be these 2 knit stitches that are always above your cable. It makes a knit column all the way up. Actually, I can show you.
Okay.
So hang on a second. Yeah, even this one is say from a color perspective. So inside the cable, you're always going to have 2 knit stitches. And so as you cast off the 8, you would cast off across, and then you'd be right at that point of the cable to be able to see that there's the 2 knit stitches in that cable, as opposed to the stocking stitch that's either side. I'm looking at my monitor thinking that just looks like a jumble of stitches right now.
Yeah, it kind of does.
It kind of does. That doesn't really help. I was hoping it would, but it'll make more sense as your piece grows. It will make more sense about having those 2 column stitches that are very it's a very well written chart to have. And I'm normally a pattern written, not a chart person. I don't usually do charts, but I found it was quite easy to look at this because seeing it visually this way, you get to know that these 2 stitches are your garter stitch column here. You know that that's going to be a garter stitch ridge right before your cables. And then those repeat every, I think it's 10 rows, 5 to 28, every 8 rows.
Trina, do you have time to show that one where you said to put it as though you're making a purl and then you go into the back of the stitch?
Put it for about the cable. Is that cable related or?
I don't remember what it was, but you did, you didn't do a purl, you put it in the back of the stitch.
Was it when I'm doing the increase so that it's knit, purl,
Yeah.
knit into the same stitch? That
Yeah.
one? Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So each row has got knit 2 for your first 2 stitches.
Yeah.
And then you're going to knit the first stitch, but keep on the left needle the stitch. Bring your right needle around and then put it into the back of the same stitch.
Okay.
And that's called knitting in the back. So now I'm knitting the back of that. And then again, keeping it again on the left needle, I'm taking the right needle and I'm twisting it back into the front of the knit stitch again. So I'm making 3 stitches where there was just 1 stitch before.
Okay. Thanks.
So that's okay, I'll do it again. So I go to knit the first as if I would regularly knit it, but before taking it off, I take the same right needle into the back of the same stitch and pass the wool around as if I'm going to knit into the back of it, and then bring it again around into the front of the stitch and knit the front of the stitch.
You've got 3. Yeah.
I have 3, whereas there was just the 1 before. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. So as I say, from a homework perspective, if you don't want to get to the decrease part, then if you want to complete the setup rows and maybe work row 1 to 8 if you'd like, and then we can do the decrease part together. If you are feeling like you want to keep going, by all means, keep going. You have to repeat the second chart. The first chart we're only doing once. The second chart you have to do a total of 6 times. So as you're working your way through, once you've completed the 6 times, you'll have 124 stitches on your needle. And then that's when we can go, after that, you repeat it up to row 23 the next time. And then we go on to the nice alternating color portion. So as with before, I'm definitely, I know when you send out the video, if you include my email, if those that don't have it, please email me if you have any questions. If you want just, if you got any concerns over doing that cable twist, then let me know, and I can see if it's getting you help with perhaps watching you do it, and then see if that works to do the cable twist.